Okay, Dale, it's time to come up and talk about the rest of everything that we haven't covered already this afternoon. And you have 6 minutes and 28 seconds to do it. Can you get that done?
I have a text.
You have a text? Okay, that's good with it on that side, right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dale Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So Chris is going to drive the slides for me, which takes away one of the things I've been feeling vulnerable about. This is the vulnerable moment to start out. The second thing is I have a text, and it's not a text. I'm reading from a screen, so I'm glad I'm not driving the slides at the same time. When we're talking about perspective, we need to remember we're not seeing things all the same way. So I went to some perspective paintings. This is Picasso's Teacups. And then the next one, thank you, is a bullfight. Now, maybe all the elements of the scene are here, but the bullfight shows perhaps different moments of time in the same image, different points of view from one side or the other side of the bull in the same image, maybe the crowd's picture, but also maybe the bullfighter's point of view, maybe the bull's point of view. So when we're talking about perspectives, that's one of the things to remember. And I mention this because later on in the presentation, I have a couple of charts or graphs or illustrations, diagrams, which are abstractions as well. So this is one type of abstraction of an image, and all of the visuals and infographics we use are other abstractions that will be similarly clear and unclear, but sometimes we see them more as clear. Now, as well as bringing different perspectives, excuse me, to the question of settlement and integration, we also have some things in common, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thanks. I was scared of the 6 minutes. I wanted to acknowledge our commonalities as well. We're here today because we share an interest not only in the topic of immigration and immigrant settlement, but in the success of Canada's immigration and integration project. We're engaged in this broad sector because we have some kind of commitment to some kind of good that will accrue, both to Canada and to newcomers to Canada, by Canada's accepting and welcoming and being changed by a steady flow of newcomers. So a perspective we share is that both settled Canadians and new Canadians will benefit from migration, but also from newcomers succeeding and thriving in Canada. And Jean, in a sense, summarized my whole presentation when he said it's all about reciprocity. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'm going to go through the rest of it as well. Could I have the next slide? So, back one. So we've heard from various orders of government today, and I think it's worthwhile remembering that our orders of government in Canada are not strictly levels of government. There's a lot of distributed jurisdiction, and it's not strictly hierarchical. Federal authority manages immigrant selection and the citizenship process and supports the stages between these key moments, and has limited influence beyond the time of formal naturalization, at which point, in theory, immigrants are Canadians and there's no difference. Provincial authority is strong in many domains, including economic resources, and thus takes primary responsibility for economic development, which drives needs and opportunities both for employment, both for employers, as we've heard from Bill and Chris and others, and also for newcomers and for residents and citizens about our need for opportunities as employees and economic agents in the community. And then the municipal jurisdiction manages communities, the physical and social environments where we live, and so this jurisdiction, this level of government, carries the load of all the services that we require and consume when we're not at work. And as our mayors will tell us, or folks from AUMA, if the municipal government were to shut down, we'd notice that first. Yeah, the next one, thank you. If our garbage wasn't collected, we would notice that sooner than if our taxes weren't collected. So beyond government, in Canada, newcomer welcome, settlement, and integration activities are significantly, not exclusively, provided by specialized professional community-based organizations. More than half the newcomers arriving in Alberta, for the time being, excluding those on temporary work visas, receive services from these specialized organizations in communities across the province. And most of the clients of settlement organizations can access all types of services, practical and cultural adjustment, language and employment supports from these specialized agencies. Now, I should mention, just as a footnote, settlement in our vocabulary means two things. As you'll notice from the agenda for the meeting tomorrow, the whole broad field of settlement is the four pillars, as Diane and Natasha were explaining, around, and we'll get into that in a bit. And then settlement is also a subset of that, which tomorrow's agenda calls core settlement services. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think you'll figure out in each case which one I'm referring to. So in Alberta, as settlement organizations, we work together through our provincial umbrella association. You heard earlier in the morning about AAISA. You see our logo on the materials for this conference. And the members of this organization provide services in communities that have significant populations of recent newcomers. Now, there's two important characteristics of our community-based, of these organizations that provide settlement services that I want to just talk about a little bit. One is, you can get the next slide, that we receive government support and we are managed by community ownership. Government support is crucial for the volume, the sustainability, and the professionalism of specialized immigrant services. Many of the agencies started as a response to an emergency with community volunteers organizing, but also then as volunteers providing service. But this initial and quasi-emergency service has turned into a sustained and invaluable system, or sector, if you will, because of the simple fact that services work. Providing supports, especially through the efforts of employed and trained professionals who serve year after year, not as volunteers in the evening, providing these supports to newcomers has been demonstrated to improve both social and economic outcomes for newcomers and thus for the rest of the community as well. The ownership model still depends on the contributions of volunteers, but the actual services are offered by professionals. So to repeat, government support is crucial to support the volume, the sustainability, and the professionalism of services. And equally important is the factor of community ownership. Now, this is not because we're so-called nonprofit organizations, as though it's somehow desirable for an organization to live from check to check. Nonprofit is not a business model, and a nonprofit organization actually needs to make a financial profit in order to survive. Nonprofit is an ownership model. It means that the directors, the volunteers, don't receive dividends. They don't go home with profit from the organization. But it is an ownership model, not an operating model for a business. And so that's why I'm using the term of community-based to talk about, or community ownership, to talk about the business model, or the ownership model that we operate under. Community ownership means that organizations exist solely because groups of citizens share an interest in the character of their community. In our case, the organizations that comprise the Alberta Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies, we all exist because groups of citizens, both settled Canadians and more recent arrivals in Canada, all across Alberta, came together around the belief that welcoming and supporting newcomers and creating conditions for their success was a cause worth volunteering for. One of the directors at my organization said recently, I give to the food bank because it's the right thing to do, but your clients are programmed for success. This is exciting. People are involved because it's about the kind of community where they want to live. So volunteer ownership is a sign and a test and a guarantee of the commitment of a community. The fact that Canada has, as a national community, developed a network and a system of these resources with government support and local community ownership is an accomplishment and an indicator not to be taken lightly. Communities, not government, hold the values, create the vision and the organization, and continue to take responsibility for ownership and leadership. Good. So when we talk about that's the character of our involvement, not just for immigrant serving agencies. I know there are other community-based organizations in the room, and we exist because of the strength of the vision and values of people in our local communities. So then I want to switch a little bit to talk about the four themes, or the four pillars, was the other term, of the broad settlement envelope, and we're going to spend all day tomorrow talking about these. I don't want to say too much about the services because I think you're all quite familiar, but I do want to talk a bit about how we're imaging this, because this is a certain abstraction to say there are four pillars or four components to the settlement language. So this is really useful as a way to talk about resources, in which the parts need to add up to the whole. And we were challenged again this morning. There are many demands. There's a limited pie. When we cut the pie in pieces, then we see what the proportional allocation is. But this is an abstraction as well, and that's the problem with our programs. Program is an abstraction. It's a way we have of organizing resources. It's not the product that people come looking for when they come to our organization. If somebody says, I'm looking for a program, they've already been through high school and they know that's what they have to jump through to get to the job. But folks are looking for the results of programs, and we're packaging resources through programs in order to deliver those results. So it's a tool for thinking about things and for efficiency. And certainly it's better than if we didn't have it. I don't want to suggest that money shouldn't be allocated in programs, or that there shouldn't be, themes and priorities. I just want to remind us of the limitation of that way of thinking, because it makes it look as though these four components, language and settlement and employment and community connections, are equivalent. And from a point of view of resource allocation, they all have to fit into the same pie, but there's a conceptual difference that I want to elaborate on. And so that's the next picture, please. I want to suggest that welcome, the community component, is really foundational to the other services, that it's not a theme that's equivalent to the more technical and operational pieces that we provide through the programs and services that government funds and that communities and public sector institutions offer. In Canada, we accept newcomers and provide very concrete services such as language training and employment assistance and support in cultural adjustment as a consequence of a foundational value, which is a desire to be a welcoming community. Now, this isn't to say that services to increase the welcome of our community should not be funded or should not have their slice of the resource pie. I just wanted to offer a different abstraction, a different image to show the different nature of community connections, of the identity of the community and the role of the community in welcoming newcomers. That's a different kind of thing that we wouldn't do the others if we didn't have that value. There's a value component to being a welcoming community in Canada, for which the other streams then are very important operational consequences. And I wanted to mention this also because of the risk that the welcome is foundational and it's also fragile. If we lose the distinction, we may not be sufficiently attentive to the dynamics around us. If we forget the focus on why we're offering language and settlement and employment supports, will result in sending a very mixed message to newcomers. A message of, you're welcome, but it's really about getting these other things done, not about our reciprocity, the project that we're involved in together as newcomers and receiving communities. So I mentioned at the beginning our shared assumption, or my hope thereof, that all Canadians benefit when newcomers succeed and thrive. Perhaps we need to move this beyond a shared assumption and insist that it's a shared message from us as people working in settlement. And that leads me to talk about what's been recently in the news. Not long ago, a community was recently terrorized by a young man with a gun and an idea in his head that he had a role to do something. He had a concern about justice, about poverty, about taking up arms in support of a different kind of society. That was not long ago, but I'm not yet talking about the events of the past week and a half. I'm talking about the rampage by Justin Bork in May, who wounded 2 Mounties and killed 3, and held the residents of much of the city of Moncton as virtual hostages for many hours. As I say, he literally terrorized the community for the time of that event. It was crazy and tragic and very, very sad, and tomorrow he will be sentenced. And one of the reasons I mention that is that, as far as I can discover, his actions have had no consequences for people who are not connected to him. Other, of course, I mean, those who've been involved, those who were involved as subjects of his confusion and rage have consequences. But if your name is Bork or Justin, or if you're young and male and have a beard and wear camo and even a headband and drive a truck and resemble this person in various visible ways, you won't feel any consequences for what he did in Moncton. And of course, more recently, we've had also crazy and tragic and very sad events with the killings of Canadian military service personnel. And because those 2 attackers had a handle, Islam, with which to leverage their dissatisfaction with Canada, their actions do have consequences for people who have no connection to them. In all 3 cases, the attacks were made against uniform symbols of the nation and agents of government power, military and police. In all 3 cases, a young man with a gun and apparently acting alone attacked and killed for motives that are difficult to fathom. In all 3 cases, the story should have nothing to do with immigrants or immigration. But the 2 recent events will create consequences for immigrants and thus for those of us who believe in Canada's immigration and integration project. A week ago today, Guardian correspondent Elamine Abdelmahmoud commented on the recent shootings in a way that speaks to me of both the opportunity and the threat that Canada faces in becoming that welcoming community that is both the goal and the foundation of our settlement and integration policies and programs. He writes, and I'm quoting quite a bit, I'll tell you when I'm done. There are 2 stories about Canada. They are both real, and they're at odds with each other. The first story is epitomized by Canadian anchor Peter Mansbridge on Wednesday. Tired as he may have been after leading the CBC's coverage when first 2 soldiers were deliberately run down in Quebec Monday, and then during Wednesday's tragic shooting in Ottawa, he maintained his respectful tone and earned praise for not jumping to any conclusions about the shooter. Some people outside Canada expressed surprise that this kind of restraint was possible, given their experience of the American, but that is US, media. But we're a measured people, and we all knew that Mansbridge was reflecting our best values. The core of the first story of Canada is that we believe we are made stronger by our diversity, different but together, side by side. It's a celebratory story, and it's about as beautiful a national narrative as you're going to get on this planet. There is another story, though. The second story of Canada is relatively new, but equally real, and it's emerged out of the limitations of the first story. It's the story of a Canada that is wary of, or at least a little worried about, how much diversity is too much. It's a story shaped by anxieties about whether the tolerance built into our institutions has gone too far. The story of the measured Canada, told so well in our national newspapers on Thursday morning, is perfect. But less perfect and still present alongside that story are the voices of a reactionary Canada. And I witnessed Islamophobia manifest in the wake of yesterday's attacks in real time on social media in comments such as, "I'm tired of these Muslims coming to our country." In Canada, we're self-congratulatory and skeptical about multiculturalism at the same time. Sophisticated multiculturalism is the dominant story we tell about ourselves, but events like those of this week reveal a fault line buried just beneath the surface. So that's the end of the quote. So what does this have to do with immigration? Well, nothing, but that's the point. None of these 3 men in Moncton or in Quebec or in Ottawa were immigrants, but the actions of 2 of them have consequences for immigrants that are not the same as for non-immigrants. So the stories and the different consequences, not for the criminals, but for those with no connections to them, have a great deal to do with integration, and thus with immigrant success in Canada. The programs and services and resources that Canada as a community can provide to support newcomers will reach an early limit of efficacy if the environment throws up obstacles based on assumptions and judgments and imagined conclusions or connections. Some of us will and some of us will not face the prospect of our children or grandchildren coming home from school having been teased about being a terrorist. And some of us will and some of us will not face the prospect of kids coming home from school having been teased about having Ebola. Some of us will and some will not face the prospect of being accused by strangers in the street of not belonging here. And so that's where I come back to community ownership and the value-based roots of our sector and the services that we provide. In every community across the province, we have people who don't accept that these differences are barriers. In the community-based sector, we welcome, surely, the growing and crucial involvement of so many public, quasi-public, and private institutions in welcoming newcomers. We also celebrate that our core identity is a values-based mandate, a mandate from and ownership by local community volunteers who are prepared to take on responsibility and liability and leadership in support of a vision of an inclusive community, because that's the kind of community where they want to live. Thank you.